Welcome back to the Kingsway podcast.
Welcome. It's good to see you.
It is great to be back. We've taken a unannounced hiatus for a few weeks.
I like that word, hiatus, sabbatical, yes,
that
whatever.
Is mostly because I was on vacation, and I'm the one who does all of the things that help you see our conversation or hear it.
Yes, and tell them where you went.
Yes, I went to the East Coast. I went to, my wife and I, let me back up. There's 3 places we went. The first place was St. Louis, because we flew out of there for our vacation, but also because that's where my family is, and my grandma passed away, and so we had her memorial.
Yes.
So I was there Friday night after work, so that Saturday we could do the memorial, and I did the music, and I spoke at it, and my wife and I put together the little booklet, and we did the whole thing. So it was a lot of work, but really good to see my family.
Good.
And
that's good. How old was your grandma?
I'm not going to get this
Older.
right. I don't think she was old.
Okay.
I think she was like 83.
Yeah, okay.
So like reasonably old.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so my grandpa was up there, which he and his late wife lived in Arizona. So it was like a memorial, not a funeral, because the funeral is going to be in Arizona later.
Gotcha. Okay.
Anyway.
And then you went to Boston.
Did all that. And then we flew out to the East Coast.
Yeah.
We flew into Boston, went to Rye, New Hampshire, and just stayed on the coast.
Oh.
It's like, it's not a like surfs up, fun, happy, warm coast. It's like a cable knit sweater brewed
Sounds
over
great.
the cloudy ocean, hitting the rocks in your lighthouse kind of.
Sounds great. I love that.
It's a
I'm
little more our
jealous.
vibe
That
than
sounds great.
than the tubing kind of surfing kind of beach.
One more question. You had a lobster roll, and
I did have a lobster roll.
You
and
weren't
I
too
thought
impressed? You thought it was overpriced?
I would rather have a McDonald's McDouble for $1 than I would have a $28 market price lobster roll. It's like a texture with no flavor.
Yeah.
But then the flavor of it is slaw, bread, mayo. At that point, give me a chicken salad sandwich.
I
Lamb
had
lobsters.
one several years ago. We were out there. I liked it, but I was super hungry when we ate it. So
Yeah.
maybe I was,
I think the thing that got me was
certainly
there
more
was
expensive than.
there's no flavor. I'm pretty sure all meat has like little flavor. Pork more than others, but it's like imbued by how you cook it and how you whatever. Well, boiling a lobster is like okay,
Not a whole lot
It's
of
not
flavor.
not a whole lot going on. It's mostly texture, and you're not getting a giant lobster bicep that you're eating a whole 12 ounces of. It's like all these little ligaments and things, and it's kind of weird.
Okay.
I didn't like it.
That's probably more detail than we needed, but
Yep.
yes. Okay.
Anyway, way too much detail. But I had fun. I got a hat
Good.
with a lobster on it.
Good. And
I
you're
went to
back.
Harvard,
You went to
not for
Harvard?
school, just
Yeah.
to look at it.
Okay.
And it's there,
Okay. Yeah.
just like it was.
I had a Harvard T-shirt on this weekend when I was doing the baptism,
Yeah,
so we were kind of in sync.
I have a Harvard mug now.
Wow.
For pouring baptisms.
Oh, okay. Good.
That's a stupid baptism joke.
Ivy League. Yes. What are we going to talk about today?
Well, we're going to continue our Sunday Study Hall segment with John's sermon from a week and a half ago at this point when we're recording it.
Yes.
So here we go. Well, we're back, and we are talking about the passage that John preached on, which is Matthew 6, 1 through 6,
1 through 6.
and 16 through 18.
Yeah, we skipped some.
If that seems convoluted, it is. But it is mostly because Jesus is making a 3-pronged argument or a 3-exampled argument.
Yeah.
One argument over 3. Anyway, you get it. And it's not to practice your righteousness in front of other people, but it's the examples of prayer and giving and fasting.
Yes. So all 3 of those segments are very, very similar. So that's why we put
And
them
they're all
together.
very short, except for the one on prayer. He goes on for a while and gives the whole Lord's Prayer, and that was a bigger topic.
Yes.
So we wanted to cover the 3-pronged argument, but not try to cover the Lord's Prayer in that same thing.
Right.
So
give that to Trevor, which he did last week.
And that'll be the next episode, which might be out tomorrow by the time you see this episode.
Yes. That's the plan.
Hopefully. We'll see how
That's the
fast I
plan.
can whip it out.
Yeah.
But so that's the section we covered. That's why it's like 8 verses with a 10-verse gap in the middle.
Yes.
Can you John already preached on this. He preached on it on July 16th. So
10 days ago, as we're
10 days
recording
ago.
this, yes.
So number one, we've both forgotten what you said.
Yes. Thank you.
Or at least had to go back and refresh it.
Right.
2, if you didn't hear the sermon at all. Or 3, if you don't go to our church and you never hear any of our sermons, we want to catch up to where we got to in that sermon and then deep dive from there. So, John, you have, as soon as I do this, a minute and 30 seconds
Okay.
to summarize your sermon.
Don't
for
think
the rest
I'll
of
need
us.
all that time, but here we go. So let me know when I can go.
Brave. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, so Matthew 6, verses 1 through 6, continuation of the Sermon on the Mount. So it starts with be careful, and the Lord instructs his disciples to be careful when we do our acts of righteousness. And those acts of righteousness consist of 3 things that he brought out: giving to the poor, prayer, and fasting. He assumes that we're going to do all those things because he says when you pray or when you give or when you fast. But he says as we do those, we're to do the right things, but we're to do them for the right reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not to do them for showing off. We're not to do them to draw attention to ourselves, but our heart needs to be in the right place. We need to do these things with an eye toward God, with an eye toward helping others, and without the idea that we are in some way puffing up ourselves. And the Lord says that if we do that, God will see us because he sees what's done in secret, and he will reward us. So that's kind of the lesson in a nutshell.
Okay.
Yeah.
You had a whole 30 seconds left.
Okay, good.
I like that.
Yeah.
That wasn't hard at all.
No.
I don't know why it's hard for Trevor, but it's
Usually hard for me too, but this section here is pretty straightforward.
Yeah,
it really is.
It's like it's already organized.
Yeah.
Some of the other ones, we don't get the organization. It's not something as familiar to us, and so we have to dig into how it's put together. This one feels like like it's just
pretty
it just
straightforward.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Was there anything out of this that you wish you were able to spend more time on, or something that just intrigued you?
Yeah.
That got you excited.
Okay. Well, all of those disciplines I could have spent more time on. One that I didn't talk a whole lot about, did some time on it, was fasting. I think fasting's a really interesting concept. It's kind of foreign to a lot of us nowadays. I don't think it was as foreign to Jesus' audience in the first century. So it would have been interesting, I think, to delve into that a little bit more, use some more examples. But really, I just kind of talked about it probably for less than 3 or 4 minutes, and gave an example of a friend of mine who used fasting in order to break his nicotine habit. Yeah. But I'd like to have gotten into fasting a little bit more as to what it can do, what it's done in the past, that kind of, and how to do it on a consistent basis. Yeah. Because I think that's something in modern Christianity, in my life, and
at least in Western American kind of Christianity,
it's something that's really fallen out of favor, unless you're doing it for a diet reason as opposed to a spiritual reason.
I've heard intermittent fasting.
Intermittent, yeah.
I said that really
something like
mumbled
that.
It,
yeah. So there's a lot of people that have done the idea where you only eat during certain hours of the day, and you fast the rest of the time. So that's pretty popular, but that's not really what we're talking about. We're doing fasting for spiritual reasons, not for health reasons. So I think it would have been maybe interesting, would have been to me anyway, to get into that topic a little bit more. I kind of shied away from getting more into prayer because I knew Trevor was going to bring that up this past week, which he did. So I thought that was okay. And then giving, I think giving is a very touchy subject. Kind of a hot button issue for a lot of people. It turned away
the rich young ruler. From the faith altogether.
It did. It's hard to do, and I've talked to a lot of friends of mine who've struggled with, well, do I give here? Is that really going to be helpful, or how should I? How much should I give? Who should I give to? Should I be worried about how they're going to use the gift? That kind of thing. That could be a whole sermon in and of itself, and we do talk about giving quite a bit during our Blessed to Bless campaign in November. So I felt like we didn't really need to get into it in excruciating detail. So I didn't want to overdo that. But I do think it's an interesting topic and one that is a struggle and a challenge.
Yeah. I think the way that our church does giving is pretty. The way we approach giving is pretty unique.
Yeah.
It's not that we don't do it or it's not there or whatever. It's still a thing around here. But when I was growing up, giving consisted of passing the plates.
Right.
It was a moment in the middle of the Sunday worship gathering.
Yes.
At my church, there would always be a person before offering and before giving, before offering, and before communion. There would always be somebody for each of those to do a
prayer.
What did they call it? Communion meditation.
Meditation. Okay.
I don't know why meditation is the word they chose for that.
Before the offering.
Yeah, they would call it before offering and communion. Okay. So before offering, it would be like a little talk about giving, a little talk about whatever, and then they pass the plates. We at our church at Kingsway do that as a whole like sermon series once a year, and it's on giving in general.
Right.
And you can give to our church. But compared to a lot of other churches, we don't talk about giving that much.
We don't pass an offering plate.
True. And was that a COVID thing, or has that been a long time?
I've started going here in 2016.
Do you remember?
And we did not pass the plate then. We had an offering plate, as I recall, by the door as you walk in and out.
Yeah, I think there's a little like
and
receptacle thing.
Now there's a box there you can put money or check in. But I don't ever remember sitting in the pews or in the chairs in our church and having an offering plate passed down.
Yeah.
Which
you don't ever remember that?
I don't think it's since 2016.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant
I'm
like
sure they did it back in the day, but
yeah,
it's probably, so that's 7 years ago. So I don't know how long it's been since we've done that here at Kingsway. But most churches, as I grew up, all of them did that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
And I brought up the idea at a church I used to go to about not doing that, about just letting it be more natural. And a lady that worked at the church spoke up and said, well, if we're going to do that, we might as well just close the doors because we can't afford that.
Yeah.
Which I thought, well, that's not showing a whole lot of faith. But
yeah.
I like the way we do it here. I really do. And our giving is really, really good.
I know this is a podcast, which means it's just audio. Hey, my flashlight's
on.
Which means it's just audio. But this is really interesting. Like we said, I was in Boston this past week.
Yeah.
And we visited the Old North Church, which is...
Heard of it?
It's a church.
Yeah.
It's old. And I believe it's north compared to some things south of it.
Around during the Revolutionary War period.
Yeah. That's the thing that most people know it for. I think Paul Revere or some revolutionary person during that time, there's a special window they jumped out of to escape the British near the front of the church.
I think that was
so they had
Paul
a plaque
Revere.
by that.
Maybe Samuel Adams. I don't know.
Something like that. There's a bunch of historical stuff for America that happened there. I'm going to show John some pictures. And on the video podcast on YouTube, I'm probably going to insert them here. If I don't, that means I forgot. And you should email me and I can fix it later.
Okay.
But we're talking about giving and churches having money. This isn't exactly pertaining to the passage, but kind of. They've decked out Old North Church. It's kept about as clearly as they can, but it's got all these informational things everywhere, and people tour it every day of the week.
Yeah,
and,
I've been in churches like that. Yeah,
there's American flags and British flags and all this other stuff to try to get you in the vibe of it. But that's what they want you to focus on. Its importance in the Revolutionary War and all that. What I couldn't help but focus on is how their seats were set up. Look at this picture. Look at this picture from the front.
Yeah. Okay.
What do you notice is different about that?
Oh, wow. They're like little cubicles.
Yeah. It's little cubicles from the front to the back of the seating area.
That's weird.
But then there's balconies all around.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah.
It's a really cool old church. But I started asking.
Pipe organ in the back.
They do have a pipe organ, and it's still used today. So it's the whole floor is these little cubicles. And I was asking around about it, and I was looking at the pamphlets and whatever. Those are box seats that you would purchase for you and your family.
Right.
And the people you love. You would have a plaque with your name on it.
That was not unusual in those days for people to kind of rent or buy a pew that they would sit at. George Washington did that at his church.
You could decorate it however you want once you rent it. And in today's money, to rent one of those pews, if they were still doing it, the equivalent of today's money would be $40,000 a year.
Whoa. Wow.
You want to talk about giving.
Oh.
That was like as much as to be seen by others as possible. It's to make sure you always have your seats. We make jokes today. Us as a church bought chairs, new chairs.
Yeah.
Maybe within the past 6 months to a year.
Yes.
And people were making jokes like, if I'm buying my own chair, can I buy a lazy boy? Can I put a plaque on it? And we're like, no.
Yeah.
You cannot.
Good idea, but no.
As funny as I thought that was, seeing that in person, seeing the literal box seats with your name on it to make sure your status, how far forward you were in the church. It's like buying concert tickets, but for church every week. Buying concert tickets equivalent.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the bigger equivalent is sports stadiums, Cardinals box seats or whatever.
Yeah.
Or the Kansas City football team.
So
the
you
Chiefs
think
box seats or whatever.
The better way to have done it would be to give your money and not request a plaque?
Yeah.
Don't you think that would have been better?
I would assume. Let's read verse about giving to the needy, 6:1-6.
Yeah.
Watch out, don't do your good deeds publicly to be admired by others.
Yeah.
I mean, plaque with your name on it.
Yeah, that seems to be flying in the face of,
maybe it's securing your seat, but also they could just not have any of those cubicles and you'd have more seating.
I never understood that. I know that was common in those days. I don't know if it came over from England or they thought of it here, but it never struck me as being an extremely Christian idea.
No.
A very Christian idea.
I'm pretty sure either in the rest of the Sermon on the Mount or somewhere else in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus talks about not desiring the seat of honor in the assembly.
Yes.
Which sounds literally like that.
Yeah.
Or a seat of honor.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. All this to say, I saw that and I was just struck by, maybe this is overboard, but what seemed like corruption. We're here to do the noble good thing of getting the British off our backs for them taxing our tea and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, all the balconies upstairs are for poor people, indigenous people, African Americans, and the rich, wealthy,
if they could get in
established,
at all.
if they could get in at all.
Yeah.
And the rich, wealthy, established
get the best seats
because they pay for them.
Yeah,
I'm like, you've got some other stuff to fix other than British taxation. Anyway,
that seems to fly in the face. Also, if you remember the book of James, in chapter 2, I believe. Let me look at that real quick because I think that's it says, suppose a man comes into your meeting wearing a gold ring and fine clothes, and a poor man in filthy clothes also comes in. If you show special attention to the man wearing fine clothes and say, here's a good seat for you, but say to the poor man, stand over there or sit on the floor by my feet, have you not discriminated among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? So, that to me strikes as being...
That scared me.
Sorry.
If you can't hear it,
there we go.
His Bible's reading James 2 to him in a very scary voice.
Yes, I know.
Well,
weird.
Shocking at least. Yeah. Maybe not scary.
That is sort of weird. Okay.
Yeah, and it's what people need to realize is as you're reading the New Testament, there's a lot of talk about classism. Not class like Dungeons and Dragons, I'm a cleric and you're a druid or whatever, but classism like socioeconomic classes, how much money you have, poor and wealthy and whatever.
Yeah.
And what people don't realize is that a lot of the times that the New Testament talks about modesty, it is economic modesty.
Yeah.
Don't walk in your shiny new Air Force Ones or whatever. I'm trying to name tennis shoes or whatever.
Have you seen the Preachers and Sneakers?
Yes. Yeah. There's part of that where maybe some of them it was a gift from somebody and they want to honor them, whatever. But like wear that on a date with your wife, maybe at a part of town that nobody's at or whatever.
Yeah.
Like there are places to wear that that aren't church where you are a representative of the Lord and you're like, the Lord wanted me to have these expensive sneakers.
Yeah.
Like how does that sit with somebody who rode the bus there?
Yeah.
And anyway, okay. All that aside, economic modesty is most of the modesty talk in the New Testament, even some of the Old Testament. It's not like they're walking around in Daisy Dukes and whatever. It's like you're walking around decked out in elegance, and that's not what God wants for you necessarily.
Nor in this specific context of bragging about your wealth in that, hey, I've given so much, look at me. sort of thing. Which, as I think I said in the sermon, we all like attention. We all like to be recognized. We all like, to be patted on the back, and we like attaboys. And sometimes to get that, we kind of nudge people and say, I did that, or look how much I gave. It's a very human impulse, I think, for us to do that. And Jesus says, don't go there. Don't go there. And again, we got to put this in the bigger context. Jesus is putting forth how we live in his kingdom, which is very, as I mentioned at the beginning of my sermon, I had a quote from John Stott. Anytime you have a quote from John Stott, that's a good
That's
thing.
how you know it's a good sermon.
And it's a good sermon. And he talked about the Sermon on the Mount being very countercultural.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And how it makes us stand out from both the irreligious and the outwardly religious. We don't want to be either one. Jesus does not like either one.
Yeah.
And also, I mentioned in the sermon, when Jesus really rails on the religious elite, and that's in chapter 23, the section where he has the
Woe
6
to the
woes.
scribes and Pharisees.
The first thing he mentions of how showy they are and how they do things in front of men. They wear their phylacteries wide and their tassels are long, and they like the praise of men. And that, to Jesus, is totally outside of his kingdom. So if you're going to be in his kingdom and do it his way, if you're building your house on his rock, which is what we're doing in the Sermon on the Mount, this is how you're going to live. It's going to be generous, but it's also going to be humble, and you're not going to do it for show.
And so we've talked a lot about wealth and wealth classes here and showiness. But to be a little more specific, this isn't about showing off your wealth in this moment. What Jesus is talking about is giving to the needy, which just got out of the preaching planning meeting for the sermon, 2 sermons from this one.
Yes, about do not worry, and treasures in heaven.
Treasures in heaven, that one.
Yeah.
We're going to talk some more about that. Yeah. So if you want to hear more about that, we're totally getting there.
Yeah.
But he's talking about actually giving rather than just, are you showing it off, or are you keeping your wealth hidden and not showing it off, but actually giving up your wealth.
Yeah. And one thing I mentioned about this section, of these 3 ideas, is how practical they are, how they are very boots on the ground kind of thing. Because, I was just thinking when you were talking this morning, my wife went to McDonald's to get breakfast.
Yep.
And there's a whole reason for that, but I won't go into it.
I also had McDonald's for breakfast this morning.
Yes. And as she's in the drive-thru, the guy in front of her, who we don't know, totally anonymous, paid for her breakfast.
Oh.
It was like $9 and something, which is really nice. So she went ahead and paid for the guy behind her. I shouldn't have mentioned that because then now it's not anonymous, but it was only $2. So we kind of came out ahead on that. But that idea of giving anonymously or giving without giving a big showy, example of what you're doing. That's a very good example of paying, for the person behind you. They'll never know who you are most of the time.
Yeah.
They never know, they don't have a chance to say thank you. It's all stored up in heaven for you because you've done what Jesus has commanded here. And that doesn't mean every time you go through the drive-thru, you've got to give, buy for the meal behind you. But once in a while, it's not a bad idea to do.
Not at all. And honestly, a very easy way to abide by this.
Gives I think, a good start to the day.
This commandment from Jesus.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have thoughts on the prayer one, or you want to move on to the questions that robot wrote for us?
The only thing about the prayer one is, again, Jesus assumes we're doing it, but he assumes that most of our prayer life is going to be in private. It's not going to be a showy thing.
And he's saying that against people whose prayer life is, they're choosing to make it more public than it needs to be.
Right. They're out on the streets and giving. So, I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but I think it's also super important. I think prayer, and I talked about how prayer is a difficult thing for most of us, including me. But one of the secrets, I think, to prayer is following this instruction, again, a very practical instruction about Jesus saying, when you pray, so it should be a very frequent thing in your life, most of your prayer life, not all of it, but most of it should be in secret, because that's where it really works as far as God communicating with you and you with God.
Yeah.
It has to be in secret, or at least it's done best in secret.
And I want to clarify some of the thought right here. There's public and secret. And you would infer from that in a group or by yourself. And it does seem like Jesus is talking about that a little bit. But a lot of the prayer that's applauded in the rest of the New Testament, there is some private, but usually it's with one or two other people or a small group of people.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of examples of that.
Yeah.
Gathering together to pray,
right.
That's not against Jesus' wishes.
No.
And so don't feel like if you struggle to pray, or if you're like, I don't know how to pray or what to pray or whatever, don't feel like you have to go off by yourself and figure it out.
Yeah.
Two things about that. One, it's easier than you think, and just building the habit is more important than doing it right, finger quotes, as if there is a totally perfect right way to do it and you're always falling short.
Right.
But secondly, feel free to honestly, earnestly, vulnerably pray with somebody you trust and you love. If you're married, you can pray with your spouse. If you have good friends or siblings or parents who love you and are on the same page and you can learn from,
but it should
pray
be
with them.
Yeah, it should be part of your daily, devotional kind of thing. You could read. Some people read the Bible. Some people read maybe some inspirational things, Upper Room or something. But prayer should be part of that, and that's super important. If the only time you pray is on the National Day of Prayer, it's probably not going to work real well. Okay. If you're just showing, if you're a politician and you show up and you give a prayer on the National Day of Prayer and you never pray the rest of the year, not going to be very impressive in God's economy. Jesus is saying on the Sermon on the Mount, that ain't going to cut it.
And on top of that, if you are the kind of person who has a desire to post your morning Devo time on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, this is the conversation for that. It's not. Let me clarify. It's not evil, but why you have to stop and ask yourself, why are you doing this? Are you? Let me read this passage and then talk about it. Yeah. When you pray, don't be like the hypocrites, like the play actors, who love to pray publicly on the street corners and in the synagogues where everyone can see them. I tell you the truth. That is all the reward they will ever get. But when you pray, go away by yourself, shut the door behind you, and pray to your Father in private. Then your Father, who sees everything, will reward you. I think there are some people who post publicly about it, but it isn't every day. And it's like, hey, I feel like God told me this thing, or I feel overwhelmed by this revelation from this scripture. Not like in 14 days this will happen, revelation, but like I never realized how deep God's grace is. It felt new this morning or whatever. Yeah. There's totally an honest, good-hearted, positive side to posting those kind of things.
Yeah.
When you have your daily Devo time and you're like, I just can't help but tell somebody about this.
Okay.
That's great.
Yeah.
But when it's like, I hope people think I'm cute because of how I posed my open Bible and my steamy cup of coffee, and I try to get the picture before the coffee stops steaming, and that's the first thing I did in the morning.
Yeah.
Like, there's a difference, and maybe it's murky, maybe it's in the middle. If you're not sure, then be defensive, be like guarding your own heart. And if you find yourself later in the day thinking, I wonder who saw that post, that might be a sign that
you're checking on how many likes you got or whatever.
That your heart wants you to pray in public on the street corners for those who would look your way.
Yeah, and, we all like to be noticed.
Yeah,
we all. I mean, it's just part of the human condition. But we gotta put that aside.
Well, you have to prioritize who you want to notice you, because our desire to be noticed is a symptom of how we were made, or a feature of how we were made. Yeah. But like, what's your quiet time for? Yeah. Try to be noticed by God.
Yeah, yeah. I had a guy come up to me after the sermon and say, "Well, does this mean they're going to get rewards later, or what's this reward thing?" We can talk about that in a minute. But what I told him was, if you're doing this for show, there's no heavenly reward.
Yeah.
There may be some earthly reward in the sense that you're getting recognized or whatever that dopamine that you're getting from getting somebody to say attaboy or look at me or whatever. Although, frankly, most people look and don't care. But if
that's true.
If that gives you some sense of importance or whatever, that is your reward right there, and it's gone.
Yeah.
That's it. But if you do it in secret and you do it in the right reasons, your Father who sees what's done in secret will see it and will reward you. That's what it says.
In 2 sermons from the one you preached, which is this upcoming Sunday. That was a really awkward way to say it. But we're going to talk about treasures in heaven and rewards again. And so I don't want to spoil anything we might say there. But I don't know exactly how rewards, treasures in heaven work. I've heard growing up like more jewels in your crown, whatever that means.
Whatever that means.
I have no idea. Or more whatever. And I know there's a significant period in the 1800s, maybe very early 1900s, the California Gold Rush and whatever, the Dust Bowl, the Great Depression. There was a lot of like financial insecurity and those kind of things happening. And there was a good chunk of people of faith for which money, security, possessions, that kind of stuff was highly important. It leads to my least favorite hymn that has ever been written. I think it is a garbage hymn.
Okay. Is it an old hymn?
It is. Like probably mid 1800s.
Oh, that's
maybe
pretty
early
old in my book. Yeah.
If this is your favorite hymn, I'm just going to go ahead and say I'm sorry.
Okay.
But also try and tell me what's wrong with what I'm about to say, because you can't.
What's the hymn?
Mansion Over the Hilltop.
I don't know it. I don't think.
Okay.
Do you have the lyrics?
The chorusy refrain kind of part is, I've got a mansion just over the hilltop. In that bright land where we'll never grow old.
Okay.
Anyway.
So it's about a mansion over the hill.
I think we've talked before about the mansion in my father's house. There are many mansions versus in my father's house there are many rooms. The textual variant. So I'm not going to cover that again.
John 14.
But let me just read you this old hymn for two reasons. One, for the treasures in heaven conversation, and two, for the conversation as a worship pastor.
So we'll be looking at the biblical accuracy of this.
You tell me,
idea.
as somebody who knows the Bible pretty well.
Okay.
How biblically accurate
strikes me. Okay.
the heart of this song is.
Okay.
I'm satisfied with just a cottage below, a little silver and a little gold. But in that city where the ransomed will shine, I want a gold one that's silver line. That's a real hymn that people really sang in church. Okay, I've got a mansion just over the hilltop and that bright land where we'll never grow old. And someday yonder, we will never more wander, but walk on streets that are purest gold. Okay. How many characters has he named yet? How many beings has he named?
Just himself so far?
Yep.
Okay. Seems to be.
Who else is in heaven? I don't know. Just a bunch of gold bars.
Yeah. So he's looking forward more to the gold, the silver, than Jesus or whoever.
Verse 2.
His loved ones.
Don't think me poor or deserted or lonely. I'm not discouraged. I'm heaven bound. Not to any person in particular, I can think. But I'm but a pilgrim in search of the city. I want a mansion, a harp, and a crown.
Does seem rather self-focused. Yes.
Yeah.
Is that your qualm with it?
Yeah.
Okay.
You never mention God. You're just like, I can't wait until I'll replace all my teeth with gold veneers and I'll look like Lil Uzi Vert or another rapper today. I don't really know any rappers. I just named the first one I can think of. But yeah, it's just like all about getting stuff, getting material possessions. And I'm like, you have missed the point.
Right.
The point is India, and you sailed the opposite way and found America. You are so far from the point.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. Anyway, I'm so upset about it. So never ask me to sing it.
Can we talk about fasting? Or
yes, we can't talk about fasting. The opposite
I
of that
could go.
hymn.
There's some things I could. I'm not going to go there.
The opposite of that hymn is fasting.
Yeah, that's true. Denying yourself. Yeah.
Let's talk about it.
Fasting, I think, is not done very much.
Yeah.
And there may be a couple of reasons. One, it's just hard to do, and we've got so much food around that it's just hard to do.
Yeah.
It requires
in a temptation
some commitment.
Way. It's not like it's hard to not put food in your mouth. It's like it's hard to not think about food.
Yeah.
And I think on top of that, we've been told that a healthy person has 3 meals a day.
Yeah.
So why would I want to not be healthy?
Not be healthy.
Yeah,
and I think the other idea is, we're living in the church period. This is a period of celebration and joy, and Jesus is risen, and, we're not like John's disciples who fasted all the time. We've got the Lord, and we're to be joyful, and prayer and fasting is not really a joyful exercise, so we're not going to do that. There's some idea, and I don't know. Maybe it's just ignored. I just was thinking back in my childhood, growing up in Cassville, and I was deprived of not much, but one of the things we didn't talk about in church that I recall ever, or have a sermon ever, is on this topic of fasting. It just never was talked that I recall, and I went to church almost every week. We never talked about it.
Yeah,
and I would guess that my experience is not uncommon. I would say there's probably a lot of lifelong Christians who've never been taught anything about fasting, have never heard a sermon about fasting.
I remember hearing my first sermon on fasting, and it was from a guy who actually fasted as a spiritual exercise.
Yeah.
And I was blown away. It felt the same as if I heard some Christian today be like, yeah, I still sacrifice doves.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, what?
Yeah, that's kind of the idea.
That's how it felt. It felt archaic. It felt weird.
Old Testament-like.
Yeah. And I remember hearing him talk about fasting, and he said, I've fasted for numerous periods in my lifetime, especially when I'm in deep prayer over something, or I feel like God is enhancing my own feeling of not being enough.
Yeah.
Like he was a senior pastor, but he was like, there were seasons where I felt like God really amplified how much I felt like I couldn't do the job and was drawing me towards him. And so I fasted for a week here or a week there or whatever. Yeah. And like real fasted, like drank some water, but not tons.
Yeah.
And like
That's
once
tough.
a week had a cup of orange juice distilled halfway with water, just so that he would have some nutrients in his body.
Wow.
But he fasted for 40 days one time. He was like,
that's crazy.
With just those like salt water and whatever
amazing.
to keep him running.
Uh-huh.
And he really did this.
Huh.
And I was like scared for him.
Yeah.
I was like, are you dumb?
Mm-hmm.
That I didn't say that, but that was the feeling I had.
Yeah.
Because I was taught growing up, healthy people have 3 meals a day, and you can snack too if you really want to.
Mm-hmm.
I was taught that you should clean your plate because that's good manners or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's why I weigh a little more than 200 pounds right now.
There's a scoop for you, people.
I have a hard time like not taking leftovers home, and I have a hard time not.
You're not alone.
I'm not alone. I feel like that's a lot of people's story around here. But we're just taught that food is a necessity, and that it is not an addiction or a.
No, the Bible doesn't give us instructions on how to fast.
Yeah.
Of course, Jesus, along with Moses, both fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. Now, I'm not going to do that. I'm just telling you right now.
Yeah.
But
that could kill you.
What we do know, certainly from the Bible, from this section of Scripture, is that when we fast, we're to do so in private.
Yeah.
It's just between me and God. So you're supposed to look good. You're supposed to put on a smile, dress like you normally would, go about your business as you normally would.
Yeah.
Do not draw attention to yourself at all because you're fasting. Let it just be between you and God. So we do know that specifically. Now, whether you're fasting from food or from something else, or if you're fasting for one day or you're fasting for a half a day, you're just missing one meal or you're missing 3 meals, I don't think God cares that much. I really don't. I think what he cares about is, where's your heart in this? Yeah. And are you following my instructions of keeping it between you and me? That's what he cares about.
That's the biggest thing that the guy who fasted and gave that sermon on fasting said, is he said, don't just abstain from food like it's a formula, like it's a magic trick, like it's going to get you anything. He said, abstain from food and do 2 things with it. 1, use your extra time to pray. If you have a 30-minute lunch break, spend 39 minutes or 29 minutes in the 30 seconds to a closet and back in prayer. Actually use fasting to help you get closer to God rather than just to be sad or whatever. Right. And he said the second thing is use your hunger pains as a prayer prompt, that it's like an alarm going off. And when you hear that alarm, you know you're supposed to take your pills, you're supposed to do your whatever. But in this case, use the alarm of your body saying, I'm hungry, and say, along with Jesus, my bread is to do the will of him, my Father in heaven, or him who sent me, or whatever.
Right.
And to use all of that as a motivation to prayer. And when you see it that way, when it's not just, I'd like to get skinnier so I'm going to fast. And also God said to fast.
Right.
But instead of doing that, treat all three of these like the same thing.
Yeah.
You fast, you give, you pray. But in all of them, you are sacrificing to be closer to God. I'm sacrificing my time.
Yeah.
And in a Sabbath-y kind of way. The Sabbath is the Saturday of the week where Jews are supposed to not do any work so that they can just enjoy the fruits of their labor and the God who gave growth to those fruits.
Right.
In a Sabbath-y kind of way, when you pray, you're giving up your ability to do anything else. You're saying no to everything else you could possibly be doing so you can say yes to some set amount of time to be with God. When you're giving, you're saying no to everything else you could spend that money on when you give to the poor. And instead of all those other things you could have bought, you're giving it to this other person in love and in sacrifice. And with fasting, you're saying no to every bite of food you could have eaten.
Right.
So that you can find your sustenance, the things that sustain you and hold you together in God.
Right. Yeah.
And when you do them for other people's approval, you're undermining the whole reason to do them in the first place.
Right. All this reminds me of the parable that Jesus told about the guy in Luke 18, the guy that prayed. There had two people praying.
Yeah.
One was the Pharisee, one was the tax collector. And the Pharisee, as you recall, he pretty much violated all of this because he was praying out loud. He was bragging on himself, and he was bragging about how he gave to the poor and how he fasted.
Thank you that I'm not a tax collector, a woman, or a dog.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the prayers they had back then.
Yeah.
And if you recall, I think in that, I'm not looking at it right now, I'm going from memory, but I think he was praying that, thinking I'm not like that tax collector, but that I give. I give 10% of all I have, and I also fast twice a week or something like that, or 3 times a week.
Some regular amount.
He was like breaking all 3 of these rules in one afternoon. And Jesus said at the end of the day, one person went home justified, and that was the tax collector who gave a very humble prayer.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a great example in Luke 18 of how not to pray and how your attitude should not be one of self-aggrandizement, but one that glorifies God, not yourself. And that's what Jesus is trying to get his voice from.
The last thing about fasting I'm going to say is a lot of the fasts that people did in the Old Testament and Jesus' day were because of feasts, which seems counterintuitive. But you would have these 7 approximately annual feasts, annual holidays.
Yeah.
Which holidays comes from holy days.
Holy days, yes.
Yep. So they would have a Passover, and they would have the Feast of Tabernacles or booths or tents, and the Feast of Trumpets, and all these other feasts. And the different ones would have different vibes to them. Easter has a certain identity and a certain feel that is different from Christmas, partially because of the time of the year, but partially because of the nature of what you're remembering.
Sure. Yeah.
And Easter is kind of a 3-pronged thing. You have Lent, where you're giving up and you're sad and you're whatever. And you have Easter, which is happy. And then you have Pentecost, which I don't know much about, and I'd sure love to know more about.
Yeah.
And that's me saying I'm going to learn more. But they're all holidays. Lent and Easter and Pentecost. Did I say Passover last time?
I don't know.
I hope not.
I can't remember.
On some of these, you're remembering the story. Just like 4th of July. If we were a little more religious as a nation, nationally religious, what I'm trying to say is we would retell the 4th of July story, the Independence Day story every year or something like that. Yeah. That's what they did in all these old holidays. And so part of telling that story is reading the words or telling the plot points. Part of that story is also putting on the experience, anamnesis, remembering in a tactile, physical, dress-up kind of way.
Yeah.
So for Passover, they have all these bitter herbs to remember their tears in the desert. They eat those so that they will feel icky, bitter, whatever, and feel like how the Passover people felt. Right. So when Jesus is talking about all this, maybe there's some weekly fasts and whatever, but a lot of the fasts are holiday fasts. It is the month leading up to, for Catholics, it's the 7 or 8 weeks, the 40 days leading up to Easter. It's Lent. We're going to give up meat other than fish on Fridays or something like that. That's a fast. That's a partial fast.
Right.
But it's not just a fast to be hungry or a fast to pray. It's a fast to put on what it was like to walk with the homeless Jesus and to kind of prepare yourself spiritually and mentally for Easter, for his resurrection, remembering that. Anyway, so there are, when you think about fasting at home, number one, if you have like diabetes or some glucose things or whatever.
Might not be a good idea.
Might not be a good idea, but you can find ways to fast. But I think for the rest of us who don't have issues with that or with different eating disorders and whatever, that may not be a good idea. But for the rest of us who just eat food because we eat food to live and because it tastes good and because we're supposed to have 3 meals a day, find times and places to fast that are regular. Find times and places to fast because you're in deep despair or agony over something.
Yeah.
You want a relative of yours who's far from Jesus to know Jesus, and you're so committed to their cause, to their good, that you fast while you pray for them or whatever.
Yeah.
And consider fasting for some annual holiday sort of thing.
Just make it part of your regular practice once a month, once a week.
I would suggest like not starting with 40 days.
No, that's probably not a good idea.
Start with like a day.
A half a day. Even.
Start with sun up to sundown.
Yeah.
I have more I could say on fasting. I actually spent a summer. Okay, I'm not going to say anything other than this. I spent a summer, my sophomore year of Bible college, living in Iowa with a kid I went to college with, his older brother, and their translator from the Middle East named Islam Wardak, who was Muslim, and he fasted during Ramadan during the summer.
Sure.
And he looked miserable. You fast for 40 days while the sun's up.
Yeah.
So as soon as the sun's down, you can eat. And my dude ate like 2 Subway footlongs at 3 a.m. one time, and I was like, this doesn't seem like fasting.
Yeah.
But
what we do know is when you fast, again, do it in private. Other than
don't
that,
advertise it.
Pretty much up between you and God.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that pretty much. The one thing that we closed on, just touch on it real quick, is each one of these, Jesus promises 3 times that you will be rewarded in heaven. Yeah. And it's easy to kind of gloss over that or ignore it, but that's part of the text. It's there, and I think we're meant to see that. I think we're meant to notice it.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that looks like. We talked about that. I just know that it's good. And I know God is able to do more than we ask or even imagine. So I think it's going to be good.
And who gives better rewards than God himself?
I think you just trust that God's going to be a really generous person, because he is. And that's going to be something that looks really, really good.
Yeah.
And it's going to be something with eternal benefit.
Yeah.
So I think we can rest in that as being a really nice reward.
I think that was a good word. If you'd like to be rewarded by our Father in heaven, would you like and subscribe? And I'm so kidding.
Store up treasures.
Oh my gosh, store up treasures in heaven by subscribing to our channel. And if you want double points on that, you can. I feel so bad for all of this. You can review us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever. That helps more people see what we do. Anyway, until next time, thanks for joining us. Have a great and glorious day in the Lord.
You bet.
See you.